Last time we talked, you spoke about sort of the ambition of trying to be the ringer for track and field, and it's interesting to me because that's also an ambition for various media outlets in the trail space too. Given that we've had that 2.5 year delta here, has the business model been working? Like, are you on track to kind of fulfill this goal?
Yeah, no, I would say so. And it's funny to look back on that, just because it's like, for me, and I was actually just talking about this with someone not that long ago, just Bill Simmons has obviously been someone who's created something so special with the Ringer podcast network and the website, which just recently underwent a total redesign. And so that the readability on there is great. And we went through our own sort of website redesign a year and a half or so ago now, and won a Webby for it as well. And so it's funny just kind of how I've taken so many cues from someone like him, and then just assessing where Citius fits in the running media landscape. Yeah, I think we've dug our heels deep into it, where we do seem to be the place that people come to for news and commentary and analysis. And a lot of it is personality driven for sure. And, from my standpoint, I guess the challenging part is always talent ID and trying to find people who match our tone, our voice, and our approach to things. But yeah, no, it's for sure. I see how we fit a little bit of that ringer mold. But actually, it's funny because I think the comparison that I draw most of the time now to people is John Boy Media instead. Because so for the people who may not be as familiar, John Boy Media, very big in the at least baseball media landscape, founded by this guy Jimmy O'Brien, diehard Yankee fan, used to do these video breakdowns and lip readings and all that kind of stuff. And it took off, and especially with he was one of the guys who was kind of unpacking the Houston Astros cheating scandal back in 2017, and that kind of was the catalyst that got him a bit more eyeballs. And so he's not a journalist at all. And I think the really fun thing is that they go about covering not just the Yankees and baseball, but now they've expanded themselves into a variety of sports. Is through the lens of the fan. And they got a profile in the New York Times a couple of years ago. And I remember reading that, and both Kyle Merber and I were chatting about it. We're just like, it's really funny. I think you could sub in our names and Citius for John Boy and track for baseball, and it would be the same exact thing. And so that's how I kind of see ourselves. And they've been successful because they've been able to broker some of these relationships with rights holders like Major League Baseball or the New York Yankees and their network. And so that's the hope for us too, is that we can find a little bit of that access as well, and continue to get creative. I think that's the fun part of my job.
So much to break down there. The first thing I want to touch on is talent identification. Obviously, historically, Citius has done an amazing job at recruiting talent, at least from a fan standpoint. Talk about what has worked recently, because I know, historically we've had people like Mac Fleet, Kyle Merber, Dana, David Melly, et cetera. Many are still here, but like, what's working right now? Like, how are you sort of scouring the space to find not necessarily their successors, but people that complement them too?
Yeah, it's really fun, because sometimes it's as easy as just sort of like the relationships you've built over time. And so for a lot of those people you rattled off names with, like, I've been friends with them for over 10 years. And so, kind of as Citius has taken its wings and developed over the last couple years, they've just been, great fits for it, because we have this natural chemistry. But at the same time, I think the biggest thing that I'm conscious of is, even for the high school crowd, I feel old sometimes. And so I'm only 31, but I like having the media reflect who the subject is. And so that's something that's really important to me, whether that's, on the diversity side or the gender side, like, you just get so many better stories and interviews when that person that you're speaking to can see themselves in, the interviewer as well. And so it's hard because there are people who might be a bit more straight-laced and come from that, journalism, capital J background, where it was J school and all the hard-hitting questions. And, there's a place for that. And maybe it's not Citius, because we are coming at it again from the perspective of the fan. I think that's one thing that maybe in our last conversation where, as I was kind of getting into really leaning into Citius Mag, it was like an important part was leaving that journalist cap aside. I still am wired in that way, but I don't necessarily feel like I'm unapologetically passionate and okay to be a fan of the athletes that I'm covering. And running is a sport where it's sort of like you're going to overlap with these people. When you and I are both runners, we go on an easy jog with some of the best athletes because we can both run 8-minute pace, for an hour and catch up and chat where it doesn't have to feel like an interview. So I feel like that's what makes running and track as a sport different and special, is that, the media overlaps with, the sport and the athletes that people cover in a certain way. And so, it's easy to look at former athletes as potential talent to bring into the fold. I've got the Magic Boost program that I've been working on over the last couple of years, where that's been, a conscious effort to help the diversity of the media landscape in track and in running. And then on top of that too, I mean, it just sort of, sometimes it's just like who you find on the internet. I think like the best case study right now is my guy, Paul Hoff-Mahoney, who is essentially like our throws guy at Citius. And the way I came about him was just sort of like, he applied to be in the Magic Boost and, he didn't get in. But I looked at his application and I saw that he was making these Instagram videos recapping like the 2023 World Championships to an audience of basically zero, like nobody. And they were very thorough, and he was rattling off these stats, and he was super smart and analytical, but no one was seeing it. And so I kind of extended an olive branch to him, and I was like, hey, listen, like, I think you're really good, and I would love, to give you a shot so that people can see how good you are and how talented and how passionate you are about this, because it matches sort of what we've got going. And so in a way, he became one of our first interns, and now he's, still continuing to contribute with us. And I love Paul, and I've been kind of giving him a lot of mentorship because, he's at journalism school at the University of Florida. And so there is still sort of, I see a need for people to come in from the creative side where they are already doing their own YouTube, work and channels, and they've got their already established platforms. But, coming through the journalism side still works. And then being a former athlete. So there's many ways to come about, finding your place in the media landscape for sure.
When you think of sort of the state of the industry from a HR standpoint, talk about what is table stakes for retaining talent. So you bring these people in, obviously their talent shines through, they're doing great work for Citius. I'm sure the question comes up about retention. I'm in trail running, obviously, which I would say is a few step functions below track and field in terms of like just like the maturity of the space from a media standpoint. But like in track and field, what do those conversations look like? What do you have to put forward to retain talent once they've really made a splash?
Yeah, the hardest thing is too, just sort of like passion can carry you for a while, right? And there are a lot of creators in the space who do it at the very beginning because they enjoy it, they love the sport, and they're having fun. But then eventually, like, everyone can get burned out, right? And I think the way to continue fostering and keeping those people and retaining them is eventually is educating, I think, those people on how to make money, doing what it is that they do. Because if it wasn't any other sport, there would be other quicker opportunities sometimes for sponsorships or partnerships with brands. And running has it. I mean, like the running companies are doing really, really well right now. And it just takes, one, getting them in front of the right people, having their work exposed on bigger platforms sometimes, and educating the creators on how to go about making things into a business, which is one thing that we definitely do with the Magic Boost program. Is, there's a whole side of it that is just, educational, of sharpening their skill set on the creative side, but then educating them on, how to setting up an LLC for some of these people is like the the very beginning parts of how to get them set up, introducing them to the sports marketing folks and the brand marketing folks at these shoe companies and all these other places. So, that's important because, yeah, again, like eventually that passion dries up. And so in a way, like it's fun for me because I can also, this is my job, and I think Citius is doing really well right now. So we're good. At the same time, I'm creating my own competition sometimes. But that's fun because we need more. I don't think there's any shortage of need for media in this sport when there's so many disciplines, there's so many field events, there's so many distance runners, sprinters. It's like you need all the help you can to tell the right amount of stories.
If I'm overstepping here, stop me. I'm just so curious, like, especially since Citius is a leader in the space, at this point, are the people that come to, contribute on the website, are they more like W-2 employees? Are they interns? Is it like a contractor type scenario?
It's interesting because we have it's a interesting structure we've got, like the website, because it's ad free. We recently redesigned it. Like, it's still one of those places that it's like, I haven't gotten the time yet to figure out what is the best way for this side of it to make money. I mean, there's traffic generated from all of the articles and stuff that we're posting, but it's not one of those places where it's like, oh, there's no Google ads or anything like that. Because I think what was important to me was that the user experience was really good on there. And I think the Webby's nice to have and to back that up. So it's not necessarily, I guess, like we'll hire freelance writers from time to time to contribute pieces there, but we've got a lot of tools already within, our staff right now where there are, full-time employees, myself, Mac Fleet, and then everyone else is, contractors. Because at the same time, like,
yeah,
for some of these people, the track side of doing media is fun for them. Like, they've got full-time jobs doing other things. It's nice to get paid to live tweet a track meet and to create graphics and to go and do interviews at things for your side hustle, which a lot of people, again, would just be what they would do as a passion project. So in a way, like, that's how again, we're only in year 3 of doing this full time. So it's not like we've got an unlimited budget yet to go out and hire as many people full time as we want. And then I think the other part of it too is that, again, bringing it back to the talent ID side of things, that's another important component, is that we're not just looking for someone who can write or someone who only does a podcast or a video. Like, you've got to be a 5-tool player here, where there's going to be times when you might have to, bring that voice to social media and for live tweeting a meet. Other times, maybe you chip in and write a quick post for the website. And then other times you might have to stand in to be an analyst on one of our shows. So it's like, I think that that's something that's also very important, is that in a way, like, again, to take Paul Hoff-Mahoney as an example, he's writing for the website. He's tweeting from time to time. We've given him the login to things. And, during the Paris Olympics, he was jumping on our shows after the meet every single day, where to drop knowledge on the field events and the throws. And yeah, again, like, we're putting him on camera at that point. And I don't know how much experience he had before that, but, we want people to be versatile in a variety of different skills, for sure.
You mentioned earlier being an unapologetic fan and overlapping pretty deeply with sort of your colleagues in the space, the athletes in the space, et cetera. And I think with this next question, I'm asking because I find myself in a similar position in trail, trying to sort of balance a bunch of lines. When you think about the business model of Citius, which is a media company that is first and foremost trying to prop up the sport and be fans, do you see a tough trade-off there when it comes to being, let's call it, like, universally positive? Some might even say to some extent sycophantic, versus being more critical and variable in your evaluations of athletes and just like the sport in general.
Yeah, but I also think that that's also where you assess where these media companies are coming from. Like, and again, I am not one of those people who's like, yeah, I think, like, let the new era come in and take over and do its thing. Like I 100% believe that there's a place for, the traditional media to do its job. And I think what we've seen in track over the last couple of years, especially, I think, because the Magic Boost has been a disruptor in doing it, is and bringing in these younger, newer voices to the media space, is just sort of like, I guess, what was described essentially as like a clash in 2022, 2023 of sorts, where it's like you have the traditional media and the content creators sharing the same exact space. And, there was some growing pains that came along with that. But I thought that's fine, because I'm sort of caught in the middle there, because I think I could live in both sides of that line. And eventually, I think in 2024 and 2023, some places like the Prefontaine Classic and the U.S. Track and Field Championships, like there were two separate sections, and I think like your credential reflected which one you would be in. I always, I think, leaned to more like the traditional media one, but we did have, someone else credentialed on the other side of the tent. And it's fine, because I think like, even though I am, the fan in the group, my interviews and when I'm asking questions to some of these athletes in the mix zone, there could be a reporter from a major newspaper or magazine or whatever it might be who has their recorder right in front of that interview that I'm doing, and gets a really good quote for their story. And I'm great. Like, that's what I want. I want the best story, the best quotes and stories presented by these major media news sites, and that's fine. And then when it comes to someone with allegations of cheating or whatever it might be, I probably won't be the one to ask the question, because of course, like, yeah, I've got relationships with the athletes and the brands and that kind of stuff, but someone else will, and will report on whatever the person, what the person asked and what the athlete or coach said. And that's fine. I think like it covered the bases, but again, like, the reporter from a major newspaper is backed by, like, they're going to have that paycheck coming their way no matter what, even if they ask that question or they don't ask that question. Again, I guess like Citius is supported again by some of the the sponsorships that we have with these major brands. And so, are we going to risk that over asking one of these questions? I don't know. Like, it is a risk, but at the same time, like, we're different. We're different in sort of like, my income is not the same as like the New York Times company is still going to pay that reporter or whatever it is. So it's a whole interesting thing there.
I guess, and again, this is a selfish question because I just find myself mired in this issue in trail. But like, you look at other media personalities in the wider sports landscape, the Bomani Joneses of the world, the Dan Le Batards, the Bill Simmonses, even though they do have journalistic backgrounds, they also position themselves, especially in a modern sense, as sort of fan first and sort of casual in their commentary. And, I am not a fan of ad hominem attacks, but they will lay into, teams and athletes from a performance standpoint. And they at the same time want to prop up the sport. But it doesn't seem like that could culturally work. Like, to be a fan in
running, you're saying?
Trail running, almost in running, it seems like you have to be.
It's hard. It is hard. I think that's something, because like we've been talking about this, I think, internally at Citius, about how like, oh man, if all these things hit, right? Like, if the Netflix series would have done amazing and we had this major blow up, and if these new leagues take off and we're now, instead of being, I would say, like a D-list sport, become B-list, I think the athletes like in track, and again, this is again because our circles are so small and there is a little bit of that overlap, the athletes can sometimes be too online and reading it, because there is just not enough media that they consume what we produce. I remember the World Championships in 2023. We were sitting down and chatting with Noah Lyles after he won gold in the 100 and the 200, and he was telling us how he was listening to our podcast every night, or like the night before, these races. And it's like, we're giving our predictions as to like how these races are going to unfold, and it's like, that's so crazy. It's like that you're the fastest man in the world and you were listening to our dumb opinions the night before, and if we would have ripped them or whatever it is, like it's fine, but it's sort of like, I guess like I they're so close to like the media and that side of things where it's, if we had this major blow up, I think the athletes have to have a little bit of a thicker skin too, where it's like, all right, it's going to be okay for us to break down and why you blew this race and where things went wrong. But yeah, I guess like in a way, the fans and the athletes and the coaches, they all need to prepare themselves for, if you really want to make it big, you got to have I think a little bit of a thicker skin. I think in this sport, it's still very small and tight where, like, yeah, to your point, like it's hard to be critical when it's like, chances are I might see this person at the next meet and they'll take issue with it for some reason.
Well, one of the questions that I've been asking myself on the trail side is, what would it look like in 2025 if I was to, I don't know if isolate is the right word, but largely distance myself from the inner circles of the sport, specifically the athletes? If I really didn't feel any emotional connection to any of them, what would be the pros and the cons of the content that would come out of Singletrack as a result? Like, what would I be gaining? What would I be losing in the process? There's a part of me right now that thinks I would be gaining a lot. There's a part of me that thinks that because I know too much and because I'm too sort of in cahoots and friendly with a lot of the top athletes, that it's actually hurting the end product for the consumer, which is largely not the pros. So I don't know if you have had similar internal struggles, but that's something I've been thinking about like endlessly the last week or two as we kind of like make our map for next year.
Yeah, I would disagree then, where I feel like I'd lean into being close to it and the access because, you know, the trade-off is going to be better interviews. And I think if you just distance yourself from it and you're just, you know, essentially like the armchair quarterback, you know, giving your opinions based off what you see, but not being present at the events or talking to the people regularly, then it's sort of, I would feel like it would hurt my credibility in the sense where, like, then why should people care and listen or tune in? Because I think like there's just so much value to it's what honestly I think does separate Citius from others is that we're present at all of these events. And like it would be very easy for me to go just on YouTube and, you know, spout off on people's race tactics or this person's good or not good. But I don't think it's that much better of a product where I think people come to us because we're present at these events. We pick up insights when we're there. We get interviews with all the people. The athletes become more familiar with us. And so, yeah, I would not go the other way of just, you know, all right, I'm going to be covering the sport from home and that's it.
You mentioned sprint earlier, and we talked about this last time. Ever since Drive to Survive, there's sort of been a clamoring from every underdog sports community out there to kind of secure one of these shows. I guess it's kind of early to analyze, but you know, season 2 just came out. Are you noticing a bump from it internally with like the growth of fans, or because this type of format is so saturated on Netflix now, is it maybe more muted than you thought it was going to be? Talk about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, because it was like everyone wanted it, and then when we got it, like I think the first season was really well done. I thought this first season was great. Second season really fell off, I thought. And I think part of the reason is because there's challenges, there's pros and cons to this whole entire process. Where it's like with Formula One, you have your 20 drivers, and that's your roster. Like it's easy. That's who you're gonna, you know, story tell around. That's set. You know, maybe a couple of people drop off from one year to the next, but that's part of the storytelling. There's not that many major changes. With track, when they shot the first season, they had to cast a super wide net and follow all these different people around with no guarantees of who the people who actually were going to succeed at the 23 World Championships were going to be. And so you end up with like this surplus of footage to cram into 6 episodes. And luckily for them, and I remember thinking this right after it was like Noah Lyles and Sha'Carri Richardson won gold, I was like, Netflix is the big winner here, because it's like you just got two American stars while all your cameras are on to win, like, and they're great personalities. And then you get, Noah's never going to say no to participating in it. They got Sha'Carri Richardson to sit down for the first season. It was really well done. And the goal there was, let's get people invested in who these athletes are before the Paris Olympics. And then once the Paris Olympics roll around for season 2, now you kind of consolidate a little bit of that cast that you have from season 1. You don't have to cast as wide of a net. But the problem is there still could be people who come in and have the year of their lives. And we saw that with Julian Alfred and Letsila Tebogo. Julian Alfred, who won gold in the women's 100, wasn't shown at all or featured at all in season 1. Letsila Tebogo completely ignored in season 1 and for the most part of season 2 as well. And maybe some of the reason was they're not Americans, they're not Jamaicans, and so they didn't hedge their bets on them as much. But they've also got really good, compelling stories. Now the challenge is you have to introduce them in season 2, where you have all these other returning characters, and some of them may have good years, some of them may not. Some of them may agree to do the series again, and others may not, which we saw. Sha'Carri Richardson didn't do the second season. A couple of the Jamaicans didn't do the second season. And it's challenging. So I think what ended up happening was, in the IOC gives them full access to do stuff for season 2, but then it just felt too Olympic saturated, where it was all about the races and not as much about the personalities and the people, which I think that's a massive missed opportunity. Gabby Thomas is a very popular figure, and she had the best Olympics, winning 3 gold medals. But she's got this other side to her where she does all this work in public health. She's in Austin, Texas, and she's the most marketable athlete in U.S. track right now. But you don't really see any of that off the track stuff. Or what was off the track stuff like for Noah Lyles, handling being the world's fastest man, or Fred Curley and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where I think it really fell off in season 2. I don't think there's going to be a season 3. Like, they announced season 2 right after 1 came out. And that happens. Like, it happened in tennis. I think tennis only did 2 seasons. And so, yeah, it's hard to break through right now. But again, at the same time, like, for all the little critical things that we could have had about, season 1 and 2 and all that stuff, I also have to remember, like, this wasn't for the diehard track fan. This is for, the casual fan, that they're sports fan, that they're trying to convert and educate in the process. And so it sort of did its job there. But then again, like, the challenge of track is that there's too many main characters.
I'm not sure if you know the answer to this question, but from what I understand, the company that made the series is called Box to Box Films. Is that correct?
Yeah.
They're the production company. And how does a company like that, which is responsible to create content across so many different domains, how do they develop any amount of subject matter expertise to tell a good story about track and field? Like, are they consulting with people like you at Citius?
Yeah, so they do. And the reason I know this is because I sat down for 4 hours of interviews for season 1, and unfortunately didn't make the final cut. Where it would have been nice to have been one of the talking heads. And they went with, Michael Johnson, Otto Bolden, and Allison Felix, which, like, hey, I mean, like, they've all got Olympic medals and they're crazy fast. And so maybe that was the through line that they wanted to do there. But yeah, they're definitely consulting with, people. I remember the executive producers that I got the chance to get to know in the process. Like, once they lean into it and they say, we're going to do this, like, they're full on in. And so they're going to, Kenya, they're going to Botswana, they're going to Jamaica, and they're multiple trips all around the diamond. Like, it was a big, intensive project for them to take on. And it was, so yeah, I mean, they did their research and they've done that. I guess, like, the cool thing about having the success with Drive to Survive and some of these other docs is that you have a playbook at that point, and you see what works and what people are, receptive to. You see, I saw a couple of the similarities. The quick walk-in shots as they're walking into the, stadium in Budapest look the same exact thing as when the drivers are walking into, the grid and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it was cool. And they are really talented and a really good team. It's just sort of like, I think honestly, like season 2 and the involvement by the IOC maybe could have been probably where it lost its way a little bit.
Earlier, you talked about, or you referenced John Boy Media as you were talking about sort of like that whole spiel about brokering rights to content. And one of the things that I think Citius does so well, I'm so impressed. You guys make it seem so easy, is like you take the example of some breaking news event happening, someone wins a race. Maybe it's a race that Citius actually isn't on the ground at, but you do this amazing job of turning around some text, a visual, maybe some video about that moment or that news in a really rapid amount of time. Can you talk about sort of how you've, like your content model there and how you can do that and how you license content, how you reach out to creators? Because it's not something that's happening in trail quite well. I mean, there are, like, I Run Far does it, but the speed to publish is not where you guys are at. So I'm fascinated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just a consequence of being chronically online. I think like that point blank, I think that's what it is. And yeah, I guess like at the heart of it, it's just how live sports, I think, across the board should be covered. For me, I lean on definitely my experience and my time at Sports Illustrated, where I kind of know and understand how the news cycle works and what hits. Like I was never on the Sports Illustrated social media team, but I understood like how they would go about curating graphics and big moments and how to really capture those in an effective way. And again, Sports Illustrated didn't have the rights to anything, and so sometimes what you just need is like a Getty Image subscription, and you're able to get photos pretty quick. But for us, like again, Getty Images is not at all his track meets, so I think we do a good job of being at a lot of the major events. When we're not, we tap people who are, start putting out feelers. We have kind of a good Rolodex of photographers, videographers, and even just sort of like people who would be boots on the ground to gather some interviews and see who's around, throw some budget toward them, for their time. And then just sort of like we've built out like a pretty solid social media squad where, I'm on, I kind of lead some of that too, but David Melly has been a major role in that as well. I think that's kind of like what he's taken on and really led over the last couple of years, where there's a voice too, I think, to Citius's social channels where, we're not just like the Associated Press giving you like the most bland way possible, a 2-sentence description of what the race is. Like we throw in the emojis, we get excited, and like we have crack some jokes in there as well, because we want to make it fun. And that's an important, when people are able to come to our Instagram, for example, I think that's the one place I usually tell people, it's like, you want to get into track, you want to keep up with like all the major news that's happening, the easiest thing you could do, follow Citius Mag on Instagram. All the big breaking news stuff, whether it's athletes signing contracts, whether it's, rule changes, new events being announced, or whatever it might be, like, we're on top of it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, we use Slack, we use iMessage, and like, so it's very like, bare bones, like, and we just kind of have an open line of communication among like our whole team, where it's like race ends, we're in touch with the photographer, we've got our captions queued up, graphics ready. It's a well-oiled machine. And I think like for us, I think I look forward to the most is like, how can we get faster? How can, like, by the time that before the person even crosses the finish line, we've already declared them the winner. We haven't done that yet, but maybe that's sort of like the next frontier.
How about, because this is something that I actually, from a media standpoint, I cherish about trail running. There are very few exceptions to this, but for the most part, most races, most race leagues are very open and receptive to the media being there and basically helping them do marketing for the race. Like, really like free reign on taking photos, taking videos, making movies. There are media passes that exist, but very easy. When I hear about sort of your struggles in the track and field space at the Olympics, that Olympic story that you told on your recap was wild, about getting banned on Instagram for a day, and at the World
3
Champs,
days.
like what you can and can't do.
I was a felon. I was
3 days,
locked
sorry,
up for 3 days. Couldn't do anything.
Can you talk about that and whether you think sort of those impositions or those restrictions are they holding back the growth of the sport?
For sure. Yeah, it's challenging. And I think like when people kind of always ask, it's like, what's your biggest challenge or struggle? And it does come down to that. Again, not being flushed with billions of dollars. We can't just go up and buy the rights to all of the, different big leagues and meets and all that kind of stuff. I'm optimistic about some of the new ventures for sure that are coming into the space. Obviously, I think people can tell from just sort of the social media promotion in the last couple months of Michael Johnson's new professional track league that we've been privy to. Again, like I think it's not rocket science for people to try and figure out how Citius like getting all these announcements and breaking all the signings and stuff. It's like you guys forget Kyle Merber before he moved on to Grand Slam track was my right hand man. We're still on Mondays. I run with Kyle in my headphones, and we're both running both in two different places, and we're just catching up on things. He's still one of my best friends, and so it's not rocket science, people. And so we're excited about sort of seeing where that goes. We've been in talks with the league, Michael, myself, Kyle, their whole team. I mean, they've got great people there, but for things like, the Diamond League, the Olympics, yeah, I mean, it's so restrictive. And I understand like the rights holders are going to protect, what they paid a lot of money for. But I do think that if we go back a couple of years and look at how, Major League Baseball struggled with the same exact issue where I think they were being so controlling and the NBA, I think at one point was like this too, where it would just like strike down and shut down and take down all these different places that were putting up clips and stuff. But the NBA, I think, was the first major league that leaned into and being like, we need people to see our product and look at their what their rights deals are going for now and how booming that sport is. And eventually Major League Baseball relaxed, I think, a bit of its restrictions on that. And track is nowhere near that. The Olympics and NBC and the IOC protecting that stuff, I get that. I mean, so we had to get creative around how we covered the Olympics when even at the Olympics, we can't do video interviews in the mix zone, which is what we do 80% of the year or 90% of the year, I would say, aside from just sort of like the Olympics. Every other year, even at the World Championships, we can get these post-race interviews on our iPhones and have them up on YouTube right away. The only thing we could do, I think, at this point, which was kind of, I think, the first little change I ever saw from the IOC was the press conference videos where we were able to upload those to YouTube. And the viewership and numbers on those things were crazy. And it only leads me to kick myself to think it's like, man, if they weren't just so controlling over every little dollar they could squeeze out of the Olympics, that and let the media just do the mixed zone interviews in the same way that the World Championships does with, kudos to World Athletics for their whole setup. That would have been millions and millions more views that we would have garnered and growth, I'm sure, across every channel. But yeah, we had to pivot and get creative. And again, for me, like that was sort of like, how can we still get across what these athletes are telling us after the race? Quote graphics ended up being like our calling card at that point. Transcribing things as quick as possible and throwing them up, on Twitter and Instagram and anywhere really, because, other than that, like, you weren't going to hear from these athletes aside from their short TV interview unless you read stories that would come out hours and hours later. And so, yeah, I think it's sort of, again, from my own sort of background, and one of the things I love the most is the strategy side of things. It's like, how can we continue to, make the most out of whatever digital means we have to present the news? It's sort of like, I look at it as being like, oh, you pay $8 a month for Twitter and you have access to write as long of a caption as possible. Sure, we're going to take advantage of that and like put longer quotes on there and give people sort of, they don't have to go anywhere. It's like, we want to hit people wherever they are, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, now Blue Sky, or whatever it might be, with the news or a way to get the news and information, commentary, interviews, whatever it might be. So yeah, but so sometimes I'm like, oh, it'd be amazing for us to have rights to things. But again, we're crushing it. We're doing a good job without any of that, and we're gonna find a way.
I'm mad that we don't have more time. I got to figure out a way to consolidate all my follow-up questions here. When you think about, because you mentioned Grand Slam track and Michael Johnson, this is a two-part question. I'm curious what input you offered to the coverage portion of that conversation about the future of that league, and B, what does Citius need to make it worthwhile for you to be there and to invest in that new space for athletes?
Yeah. So, and kudos to them. It wasn't just me offering insights on what could be different about the media access and all that kind of stuff. During the Olympic trials, they actually had a little bit of uh, like an open forum of sorts where they had a whiteboard up at the front of the room, and they invited anyone who is accredited media at the Olympic trials to come in. And this is a new league. They're starting from scratch. So it's like no one's a rights holder right now. They're this is back in June. They wanted to hear from the media themselves. What are your biggest obstacles and problems? And, how can we make your job better? Because in return, like, you guys are the storytellers for our sport. Like, what do you guys need? And it was, there were people there from TV. There were content creators there. There were reporters there. There were whoever it was. It was a very interesting room to be in. And people, they filled up the whiteboard with all these ideas, things as easy as just sort of like, I don't know, like if they're not wearing bibs during these races, like how are the people on TV going to be able to identify who's running? So like, what are you guys going to do about that? Like access to a variety of different things. And so, that's, I guess, like the cool part about something new starting from scratch is that you're not beholden to any of the previous rules or structures of things. And so, I think they're doing a good job of getting outside opinions on things. And how does Citius fit into the whole thing? Well, it's just sort of like we have their target demographic and market. Like, and if you look across the board, I can confidently say we are the place right now where it's got the highest engagement, the most people, I think, sort of in that 18 to 30. We've got that group, the 18 to 34 diehard track and field fan who isn't really watching these races on TV or subscribing to Peacock, because we know those numbers are public out there. Like, we see how bad the TV numbers are, but those are the people who are on our social channels or on our YouTube channels, getting their fix of track stuff. So that's who they want. And so we've got a big group there. So it's easy for them to tap into when we work together. And so, we're coming up with creative concepts and ideas of like, what is that going to look like, when year round we're not at the meets, but then also what is it going to look like on the ground when we're there? And so that's sort of where we're at with things. And it's been cool to kind of build that trust over time. If we go back, I think, like, in the Citius Mag podcast archives, summer 2022, during the World Championships, Michael Johnson came to our backyard and was spitballing. We had sort of like this conversation. It's one of my favorite interviews. And now if you go back and watch it, there's little breadcrumbs as to like what this league eventually would become. And so that's sort of like where a lot of that really started, I would say. It was sort of when, I would like to think Michael walked away from that being like, oh, that was really interesting. It was a bigger picture conversation on the sport rather than just unpacking, who he thinks is going to win the 100 or whatever. Like, that was sort of like we were problem solving there. And it was for over an hour. And so, those fanboys on lawn chairs in a backyard actually were onto something there. And so, that's sort of like, where things started and how things are going. And so I'm optimistic. I'm rooting for them. And I'm rooting for all the new ventures, the Athlos with Alexis Ohanian. Like, we did a all women's pre-race show at their event as well. I don't know what phase 2 of their, venture is going to look like. We're slated to have a call with them as well. And so, in a way, like, I root for everyone's success, and because we're in it too. The success of the sport means Citius gets to be successful too. And so we're all aligned on our mission of, bringing more people and more eyeballs to the sport.
I'm excited about the Grand Slam track because, and I think about trail. We do have a bunch of series. We've got the UTMB World Series, the Golden Trail World Series, the Skyrunner Series, but there's no through line. Like you could, like a runner could just show up at one of the races and then not participate in the rest, and that doesn't change anything. Whereas you're kind of beholden to being there at the Grand Slam track across all the meets, which is kind of cool. But one last question on the, like, do you have free reign there? Like when you go to a meet, like the Jamaica meet, can Citius produce whatever it wants in terms of like video, photo? There's no restrictions.
Let's hope so. I think that's something we're trying to nail down. And so we'll see. I mean, again, they haven't announced their TV deal and who their streaming partner might be. But there is a conscious effort on their side of things to welcome in, the creators, and that was a big thing. Knowing that, the internet is constantly evolving, and there's younger voices, more diverse voices who are present at these events, and they're also struggling with the same exact issues of like, I can't really film things because, if I show the track in the background, my video is going to be taken down or flagged or whatever it might be. And so, there's things like that I think are still being sorted out. But hey, let's hope so, because, I think that's been the big dream. When, again, bringing it back to John Boy Media, once they brokered their deal with the Yes Network and were able to do stuff with Yankees highlights and footage, like that, it elevated sort of what their content. They weren't just talking about and breaking down an event or stuff or a game or a play. They were able to show it. And so I think about moments like that. It's like when we have these world-class athletes sitting down with us in the most relaxed settings, and we have, our analysts who sometimes were former professional runners, and they can really unpack a race or dissect things. Like, it just steps up just sort of things you've never really kind of seen before in track and in media. So that's what I'm hoping for.
One last thing on the Grand Slam, because I'm always curious about the people that are equipped to fundamentally change a sport, change its direction, bring like this league structure in. When you look at someone like Michael Johnson, what do you see as his superpowers, or what do you think makes him well equipped to kind of bring this fundamental change to track and field?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of people can be caught up in sort of the shine of, this legend of the sport who won these gold medals, but Michael's a businessman. And like, it's outside of the stuff he's done outside of track, that, and the people that he surrounded himself with, that really, I think, will help dictate how successful this thing is. It's not just, the face of this. Our Adam Silver is not just one of the most accomplished, like, U.S. track and field Olympians of all time. Like, the commissioner side of things, like, that's a nice, awesome title and all that stuff. But he's surrounded by all these people, and he's pulling people from all these different sports that don't have track backgrounds. They have Kyle. So Kyle can speak to things from like the track nerd standpoint, and as a former athlete, as to like, I think this will be a good idea, or that won't be as receptive, to fans. But, one, I think the business savviness of Michael Johnson, of the way he's methodically thinking of how can we make this, a league and a sport that really thrives, not just for the league, but also for the athletes. How can they really, maximize on the star power outside of the Olympics that they deserve? And so I think that's what I'm most encouraged by when I look at just sort of like who's attached to this. And it's a work in progress. Like, I think if you ask anyone involved, sort of, is it going to be a massive success after year one, and by this time next year we're talking about it like it's, Formula One? Definitely not. Like, it's going to take time for this thing to take off. And I think everyone knows that too. And that it's not going to be this thing. There's going to be growing pains along the way. The league structure or certain things will probably be tweaked. They're receptive to feedback from the athletes. So I think all of that is important. And again, I think in that backyard conversation from 2022, I think one of the questions we did ask him was sort of like, why hasn't he ever run for USATF president or World Athletics president, whatever it is. And it was because the structure of the sport and the way you're, kind of handcuffed by the priorities of all these different people and stakeholders just wouldn't allow for you to really be the change agent that you want to be. And this thing coming out of the blue with some crazy funding, it's cool to see what millions and millions of dollars allows you to do to really be that disruptor.
I know we're almost at time here. I really appreciate it. You mentioned at the top of the conversation, this is year 3 of doing Citius full time. Citius is doing really well. Media is a tough game, though. There's a graveyard of media companies out there, really tough. When you think about the business side of this, is the path forward for you? Is it all advertising? Is it special partnerships? Is it subscriptions? Is it investors? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah. Again, I think like it's so interesting because like I'll get emails from time to time asking about, are you taking on investors? And I've had to like table a lot of those, offers or talks, because it's sort of like right now we're in a good spot. I think like for me, unless it was a crazy, insane offer, I feel good about our continued growth year over year and seeing just sort of what these numbers look like on the audience side of things, like our sponsorship dollars, our partnerships, like everything is flourishing right now. And there's just really good momentum going. And I think like the goal would be continue that through, one Olympic cycle just ended, and sort of like in our industry, we just kind of think in Olympic cycles. And so it's sort of like we're back to year 0. And now we start on our next 4-year quest. And the cool part is that like everyone is already excited about, where this next one's taking us, because it's back here. It's in LA, our home Olympics in 2028. And so I'm excited by just sort of like, hopefully what we look like in 2027 going into 2028. Like, I think my hope is that is when Citius is at its strongest, bringing in and attracting some of the biggest partners, even outside of the sport. Not necessarily all these footwear brands that are awesome and work with us, but like, yeah, let's bring in the DraftKings or FanDuel or whoever it might be who wants to tap, at that point, 500,000 followers on Instagram or whatever it might be, or whatever the next big platform is for us. So yeah, I mean, I want to just, continue keeping my foot on the gas on that side of things, surrounding myself with more people who are aligned with that mission. So yeah, I mean, it's a fun time right now. And so, yeah, just got to keep it going.
Is podcast advertising the main source, or are you pretty diversified?
Pretty diversified, I think, at this point. And it's fun to just not have to think of like, oh yeah, like we're scrambling to find, podcast sponsors or newsletter sponsors. Like, yeah, I mean, like we start those conversations early to help take care of, the months and years ahead. And so, yeah, that's the nice part about it. And then we could find other sort of revenue streams and means. And again, I guess for me, like the challenge is sort of like, all right, we've got this show taken care of. Let's get this one, sponsored or whatever it might be. And let's find a partner for this thing, or let's do this new event or create a new event or whatever it might be. So, yeah, there's never sort of a downtime here.
Last question for you before we go. This is a light one. This is a funny one. We solicited a couple of listener questions. I only picked one. I'm not going to name who said this one, but they said, Chris, you lost a mile race to Malcolm Gladwell. Does it still sting?
Yeah, it still gets brought up. That's the really funny part. It's funny. I was just I had a call with Malcolm about a week or so ago, and just catching up on a couple of things, and we were discussing how both of our running has been going, and sort of like I ran my goal marathon PR in Houston back in January. I finally got my sub-3 marathon out of the way. So, that's taken the pressure off for sure. Like now anything is just more fun for me with the marathon. Like, does a 2:55 motivate me? Not really. But will it happen? I'd love that. But I don't necessarily need to beat myself up over it. Like, if it happens, it happens. But then, now I'm back to dropping back down to short distance. And so I'd love to get mile fit and take a couple stabs at breaking 5 minutes for the mile. That still evaded me. But then Malcolm is thinking about the 800. And so maybe there could be a potential future showdown over the 800. Although I feel like I like my chances the shorter the distance gets. He's beaten me now over a mile and a 3K indoors a couple years ago that went a little bit more under the radar. But yeah, I'd love to take him on in an 800 now.
Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for your time. I really appreciate just all your insights and for being a leader in the space. Wishing you the best in 25. Thanks for the time.
No, I appreciate it, Finn. Thanks so much.